Good morning. We are Maria Fernandez and Nuria Gabas. We will be presenting the paper from Christopher Kohlmeier, Family Structure, Female Employment, and National Income Inequality, a cross-national study of 16 Western countries. We are going to talk about the research question. Then we will address the text structure, followed by an explanation of the methodology. Then we will talk about the data used for this research, the results, and the critical view. We'll talk about the social implications, and we will do a discussion about the paper to conclude. Extant literature of this topic reaches inconsistent conclusions and focus mostly on the United States. To address these shortcomings, the author draws on international comparable data for 16 Western countries to evaluate whether these social changes have distributional consequences. In other words, this study assesses whether recent changes in family structure and female employment patterns have altered the distribution of income in some countries. Specifically, the hypothesis is that increased female employment reduces income inequality, but that increased prevalence of single-mother families heightens income inequality. The text is divided in three main sections: the historical review, the literature review, and the empirical analysis of the author. Firstly, the historical context is addressed. During the mid-20th century, a strong social and religious pressures tightly circumscribed the family structure in the United States and elsewhere, creating a situation in which a nuclear family, with the father as the sole breadwinner, was far and away from the dominant family form. However, over recent decades, movement away from this family structure have caused differences in household income. Income inequality began to rise in many but not all Western countries in the early 80s. Within broad literature, one prominent sociological perspective considers the possibility that changes in family structure might have altered the distribution of income in some countries. The author continues with the literature review, where he finds some gaps. Numerous studies consider the possibility that changing family structures are affecting that changes in family structures are affecting the distribution of income in some countries. As noted earlier, the vast majority of these studies focus on the United States. Then he explains the methodology. The empirical analysis is based on income inequality estimates from the Luxembourg Income Study, from a sample of 16 Western countries observed intermittently over recent decades. Here you can see some of the different variables that the author uses. Some of them, as an example, are female labor market participation, prevalence of single motherhood, welfare expenditures, union density, etc. And we will explain later how these variables have different implications on the results. Well, the data consists on an international comparable data for 16 Western countries to assess whether these social changes have distributional consequences. The study analyzes 16 Western countries observed at unequal space interval between 1967 and 2005. The 16 countries are Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom and the United States. The data set contains a maximum of 110 observations per variable. The data come from the Luxembourg Income Study. The LIS gathers detailed data from national representative household surveys and then harmonizes this data to yield measures of income inequality that are consistent across countries and across years. The national surveys are conducted in waves, occurring approximately every 5 years.
Now we're going to present the results. Basically, the results from these two-way random effect regression models that the author uses support that female labor market participation actually reduces inequality, but that the prevalence of single-mother families heightens income inequality. When looking at the tables, we must understand that there are two tables. In the first table, we found the models from 1 to 5. The first model shows an expected negative sign, which means that more presence in the paid workforce recently by women leads to a reduced income inequality among households. In the model 2, we have an expected positive sign, which means that the prevalence of single motherhood has no effect on income inequality, which is consistent with Esping and Anderson's argument, which says that this equalizing effect is confined to the US, as the other countries are welfare states. The model 3 shows that educational obtainment does exacerbate income inequality. Model 4 shows the disequalizing effect of single motherhood, while the remaining equalizing effect of female employment becomes stronger. And then the model 5 introduces another variable, which is the control for educational homogamy, which has the expected signs. It shows that educational homogamy reduces the equalizing effect of female labor market participation. Then in the table 2, the authors add more variables. The model 7 builds on model 6, and it adds controls for two basic labor market institutions, which are the trade union density and the centralized wage bargaining, that are inversely related to income inequality. Then model 8 adds the controls for the size and generosity of the welfare state, and it shows that the amount of financial resources devoted to social welfare programs are inversely related to income inequality. That's why we find these negative signs. And then the model 9 is the full model of income inequality that accumulates the variables we've already talked about. And all in all, it shows that there's a strong support for the notion that family structure and female employment, along with the generosity of welfare state and the specificity of labor market institutions, are very important determinants of income inequality. And then as a little bit of conclusion, we have that there are two changes that have affected this pooling process, which are educational homogamy, which means that the study says that a person in a couple that has a very high education has tendency to be in couple with someone who also has very high education, and this increases inequality between the families. And then the study also shows that there are gender implications on economic disadvantages, so that there are some elements such as the gender payment gap that are a disadvantage for females. And all this, all in all, we find several consequences. First of all, that female employment serves as a cushion to disequalizing effects for model societal changes, such as the decline of organized labor or the retrenchment of social welfare provisions. It also shows that without this change, female employment, income inequality would be markedly higher in these 16 countries, and then that the equalizing effect of female unemployment was undermined in some countries by the growing portion of households headed by single mothers, which confirms the hypothesis that my colleague Noria has already explained to you. Then we also want to give a critical view on the different elements that are included in this study. First of all, we think that we could add other incomes to this single mother's analysis, such as the money earned by the divorce, especially when it includes children. Then we think that education homogamy is not the only cause to people being in couple with people who have similar incomes, but there are like backgrounds and social interactions that can also play a role, and this is not included in these models we've talked about. And then that schedules and other types of contracts can also be analyzed, not only income, in order to explain the situation of single motherhood. And then as for the context, we think that this study assumes heterosexual couples as the norm, and it doesn't take into account other types of family structures. We also would like the study to include a definition of what they mean by single, and to take into account the existence of single fathers. Then this study also assumes that the education of single mothers is inferior to the education of mothers who are married or in couple. So we think that they should give more support to their assumptions. And then as for the calculation method, we see some disparities between the bivariate and the multivariate results. So the models that include 2 variables or the models that include more than 2 variables. And then we think that it would be interesting to include a comparative approach between the countries that are analyzed. And then for the data, we find that there's a lack of data of a percentage of single mothers living with the children. There were only 81 observations from 16 countries. So another variable had to be used in order to really include reliable data, which was the percentage of children living with single mothers, but we think that they are different variables. So the result is not what the question, like it doesn't fit the question 100%. And then there's also lack of data of educational homogamy. And as a conclusion, we can see that female employment is beneficial for income distribution, but that single mother families have like struggle and they increase income inequality, which means that it's approved that there are gender-related obstacles in work-related issues, and that welfare states are better at coping with these gender-related obstacles, and all in all with income inequalities. Based on on this study, we can see that the way to minimize income inequalities is to have welfare states, as they are better at coping with gender discrimination, encouraging female employment. And from this study, we can also see that the authors encourage multiparental households. And the 3 countries that have done these 3 steps are the ones that have shown, according to the study, the least income inequality, which are Switzerland, the Netherlands, and France. Okay, so now we're going to have the discussion in class. Thank you very much, and see you.